Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my September wrap-up. Before we get into it, make sure you are subscribed and leave a comment letting me know what your favorite book of September was. And without further ado, let's get into the video. In September, I read 9 books, 3,434 pages. And then in terms of genres, I read 3 historical fiction, 2 sci-fi, 1 fantasy, 1 nonfiction, and 2 lit fiction. I'm just gonna run through them in chronological order, let you know what I liked, what I didn't like. All right, some of these books I don't have because I've already had to return them to the library, so those are the first few. The first one that I read this month was The Ballad of Jacquot de la Haye, and I loved this book. It's a story about a female pirate from Santo Domingo, and she escapes captivity and then gets captured by another pirate and then escapes that, and there's a lot of like, what is she gonna do next? There's so much found family in the crew that she collects, and the story in this book is just so fun and adventurous and fast-paced. So if you're interested in a historical fiction book that almost feels like fantasy, I would definitely recommend this one. It didn't give me the 5-star feeling, but I did give it 4.75 stars, and I would absolutely recommend it. I'm pretty sure it's based off of a true story too, which is also always really fun when you read historical fiction and you know there was like a real person behind the story. The next book I read is called Big Time by Ben Winters, and this was for my work book club, and I loved this book. I was unsure about it. I honestly went in totally blind. I had no idea what it was about. It's basically a sci-fi book where time is an element that can be manipulated, and it follows a few characters at the beginning. You have one character that's getting kidnapped, and then you have another character that works at the Food and Drug Administration in a specific department. As you read the book, all of these things come to light, and I was just so gripped by this story. I basically read like 70 pages and then one night sat down and I was like, I'm gonna read a little bit, and then finished the rest of the book, like 200 pages in one sitting. I could not put it down. I had to know what was next. The chapters were really short and the story was just so interesting. So I'm excited to talk about this with my book club because I feel like there were some things that I just like missed or that I'm confused about. I would totally recommend this, and I think it's going to be a really good book club book because there seems to be a lot to talk about. I rated that one 5 stars. The next book I finished was a reread, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. His sequel to this book just came out last month as well, which I'll be reading in October. So I wanted to refresh myself on The House in the Cerulean Sea since I hadn't read it since 2021, I think. It's been like 3 years, and I loved that book when I read it the first time, but rereading it was so special. It's such a sweet and cozy story, and the found family in that book is incredible, and I'm really excited to revisit the characters in the sequel, and I definitely would rate my reread a 5-star. And I listened to it on audiobook, which I definitely recommend doing. The audiobook was great. Oh, also, I didn't really even say what that book was about, but if you don't know, it's basically a story about this man who works for the department in charge of magical youth, and he gets assigned to this island where there's an orphanage with a bunch of children that are considered like dangerous magical children. Like one of them is the devil, and his job is to go to these places where the magical youth live, like orphanages basically, and determine whether they're safe or not. So he gets put on assignment on this island, and he stays there for a while, and his perspectives change. He builds relationships with all the people and the children on the island. So anyway, it's a very sweet book. I would absolutely recommend this one. The next book I read is Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. This was for my other book club. This book was so confusing, and I went to the book club meeting for this last week, and that was only like a week or 2 after I finished it, and I feel like I forgot so many things that happened. Basically, the concept of this is it's a story about the end of the world. Like, you start the book and they're like, the world is gonna end in 5 days, and there's an angel and a devil, and they're both trying to stop it. But there are so many characters in this book, and there were characters that showed up for like 10 pages and then you never saw them again, and I think there were a lot of references, like religious references, cultural references, because these people are both British, and like time related references since this book was written in the 90s that just completely went over my head. And I did find some parts of this really funny, but I also found a lot of parts of this like, what the heck was going on? So I wouldn't recommend it. I wish I enjoyed it more than I did. I didn't hate reading it. It was a fun book to read, but I just was like so confused what was happening most of the time. So I ended up rating this book 3.5 stars. If you're into this sort of like British strange sci-fi, maybe you'd like it, but this book was not my cup of tea. The next book, which is the last book I don't have with me that I read in September, is God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I loved this book. It was like a mystery set in a couple different time periods, but like the 60s, 70s in the Adirondacks. And basically you start the story, you find out that there's this girl that was at the summer camp that went missing, and you're following the story of how she went missing and them trying to find her. And then you're going back in time to the story of her brother, because her brother also disappeared at the same camp like a decade or so earlier. So you're getting these parallel stories of these siblings, what happened to them, and there are so many different characters that are involved in both timelines, but not in a way that's confusing. They all get their own chapters and the stories all tied together in such an interesting way. And I really enjoyed this, and I like had so many points where I could not stop reading but was getting like so spooked out. If you like something that's a little bit eerie, the woodsy atmosphere kind of like added to that vibe of the book. But I really enjoyed this one and would definitely recommend if you're looking for like a late summer, early fall. I guess we're totally in fall now, but I would say this is a good fall read. I rated this one a 4.5. The next book I read is The Women by Kristen Hanna, which is my first Kristen Hanna book, and I read this one so quickly. And if you don't know, this is a story about a girl named Frankie who joins the army to be a nurse in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. She like volunteers because her family has this whole tradition of people going to war, and she's trying to please her dad pretty much. That's where it starts. And so you get her in Vietnam, what her experience was like being a nurse in Vietnam, like a combat nurse, and then the aftermath of that, like what it was like for her to come home. And there are so many different characters that she's like forming friendships, relationships with, that really like grow to be so connected to her story. And I feel like there were some parts of this book that I didn't love. I felt like a lot of it was trying to get to a deeper level of things, but it ended up coming off kind of surface level. And I got through the first half of the book and I was like, well, if she's coming home from Vietnam, like what's next? So it does go through a lot. It's not just her being in Vietnam, but it's a lot of like day-to-day what's going on in her life. There wasn't like a big clear conflict, which I think I was expecting. But other than that, I really enjoyed this book. I think the writing was super digestible. If you're looking for a book about the Vietnam War that definitely goes over a lot of it, but talks about a piece of history that isn't typically talked about, I would definitely recommend this one. And I'm super excited to read more Kristen Hanna because I did really enjoy her writing style. I rated this one also a 4.5. The next book I read was The #1 Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith. This book is about a woman from Botswana who starts her own detective agency. Basically every chapter, every couple chapters is her solving somebody's mystery. There's like a dad that's looking for his daughter to see if she's secretly dating somebody. There's a woman who wants to find out if her husband stole a car, and then they steal the car back. It felt almost like a lot of short stories, and there was like a general arc plot, like you're getting to know the main character through all of this and like her relationship with a couple other people in her town, like area in her life. But overall, I was kind of bored. This book, similar to Good Omens, was not my favorite. I ended up rating this book a 3.5 because I enjoyed it and the writing was pretty good, but probably wouldn't recommend. And I know there's like a lot of books in this series. I will not be reading the rest of them. The next book I finished is called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Another Conversations About Race by Beverly Daniel Tatum, and I really enjoyed this one. Pretty much just listened to this book. And it's interesting because this book was written in 1997 and this is the updated version that was published in 2017. So there's this really long introduction about like more present day stuff that's going on surrounding like what she's talking about in this book and what's changed, but mostly what hasn't changed, and I feel like that was a really impactful way to start the book. Also, I went into this sort of expecting it to be more like a book on ideas on race in an educational space, like the book I had read earlier this year called Multiplication is for White People, but this was more a conversation about race and society in general. I feel like this was a really approachable book to learn more about some important topics of race that are happening in our country. And again, like, this was updated in 2017. That was 7 years ago, and still these issues are present and there. So this stuff isn't going away, and it's important for us to be educating ourselves about it. Anyway, I really enjoyed the way that it was divided into different sections. It helped it not feel so overwhelming, and it helped you like digest each section as you went. I feel like she did a really good job connecting those sections through the end of the book too. But I feel like I learned a lot reading this book. I would definitely recommend it. The audiobook isn't even that long. I think it is very important for us to be reading books like this along with our fun fiction books, because you can learn so many things from books. Definitely add this one to your TBR. I rated this one a 4.5. I really enjoyed it. It feels weird to rate nonfiction because it's not going to give you like the same like feeling as fiction books typically, but I think this was really well written, and I feel like I digested a lot from it, which is sort of what I want from my nonfiction books. Okay, last book I finished in September was Playground by Richard Powers. I have gushed about Richard Powers on this channel before, and this is his newest book. It came out at the end of September. We were actually able to get a copy from our Barnes & Noble early because they had it out on the table, so of course I had to read it. This is very similar to The Overstory. If you've read The Overstory, it's basically like the similar vibes of like lots of discussion of nature with simultaneous incredible character development and relationships between the characters in this book. And it was a little bit confusing because there weren't really chapters, but I feel like it wasn't hard to follow. Most of the time it wasn't super hard to follow who was who and what was going on. I felt like I was able to keep track pretty easily. The writing in here is just as incredible as it was in The Overstory. He does such a great job bringing you to the underwater world, and the characters you just like fall in love with throughout the story. I do have to say the end I was really confused about. I am like waiting for somebody I know to finish this so I can talk about it with them, but I would absolutely recommend this, and especially if you haven't read Richard Powers, he knows what he's doing. He's such an incredible author, and I feel like this one was a lot less dense than The Overstory was. And anyway, I'm gonna have to go further into his backlist because I just need more Richard Powers writing in my life. I rated this one a 4.75. It didn't quite give me the 5-star feeling, but I think with a reread it would. I would also love to go through this one and like underline and highlight stuff too. So anyway, those are all of the books that I read in September. Let me know down below if you've read any of these, what your favorite book of September was. Would love to have a little discussion about books in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future videos from me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye friends.